more evidence that the coronavirus can be transmitted through an airborne route, and how long before a vaccine will be developed. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Martenson with your February 11th, 2020 coronavirus update. And before we begin, I just want you to know that at Peak Prosperity, we're all about educating, and we're all about educating with information that leads to action. None of this is designed to make you more fearful or to instill any sort of a particular response in you, except for action. We really want people to take this information and use it to make them, their loved ones, their communities safer. We believe that having access to the proper information will lead people to make the proper decisions. So let's get started. Let's just jump right in here. And first thing up is, well, I guess they've renamed the virus here. The WHO has named it officially COVID-19. So I guess we'll be using that from now on. And we'll call it COVID-19. But I have a better name for it, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. What's interesting here is that the World Health Organization finally holds this press conference. They've named it COVID-19. After the group had been conscious about not picking a name that could be inaccurate or stigmatizing. Well, I'm glad they had their priorities straight and they were able to figure out how to name this thing properly. Of course, they could have been spending that time telling you the information you need, but maybe next time. All right, quick update here. First, we see that China, for the first time, had over 100 deaths that they reported. And, of course, we believe that's a very, very, very low number, order of magnitude low, probably, maybe a lot lower than that. Interesting, just in February 10th and 11th, the number of cases in Japan spikes by 67. A lot of that's on the cruise ship. Hong Kong, we're going to get to a case around what's happening in Hong Kong soon that supports the idea of airborne, also very frightening, that particular case and what it implies. And the United States ticks up one more case down here. And I'm only singling out the United States out of all of these other countries simply because I think once the United States finally gets more cases, it'll finally begin to report on and take this a bit more seriously. And this was a coronavirus case that had been confirmed in San Diego County. So that came in through California. Here's where it gets a little hinky in this particular story. This is from the New York Times. It's about an infection that may have spread through Hong Kong buildings. That's the building's possessive, a building's pipes. Dozens of people were quarantined at a Hong Kong housing complex after the virus appeared to spread through the building's pipes. That's why I'm going to propose that we rename this thing the Ninja virus. This is crazy what this story is talking about. Hong Kong officials evacuated and quarantined dozens of residents of an apartment building after two people living on, here's the clue, different floors were found to be infected with the coronavirus. The two cases appeared to suggest that the virus had spread through the building, perhaps through a pipe, raising new fears about the virus's ability to spread. Again, the Ninja virus. This is from the same story. Officials from the City Center for Health Protection said the decision to partially evacuate the building was made after the discovery of an unsealed bathroom pipe in the apartment of a newly confirmed patient. Here's the punchline. She lives 10 floors below, I think that's critical here, a resident who was found earlier to be infected. 4 other people living in 3 different units also have now displayed symptoms of the coronavirus. So here's a virus that's spreading through the building, and they think it's through these pipes. And this is raising the prospect, is this thing really airborne or is this spreading through a fecal droplet? We don't know at this point in time, but they're tying it to bathroom pipes for now. Maybe the story will change. Our initial understanding is that the relevant household may have done some self-remodeling work. How does that tie in? Well, let's take a quick peek. Mr. Chan denied the recent cases were comparable to the 2003 outbreak, which was SARS, because of the location of the pipes. Now, there was a case where with SARS, it was found that I think it was like 63 people got infected in a single building out of the SARS outbreak because of how it was transmitting through the pipes. But in that earlier case, in the SARS case, the pipes were outside the building, and the SARS virus was spread through the air. Now, again, SARS spreads during a symptomatic phase. This coronavirus, COVID-19, or the Ninja virus, is spreading in an asymptomatic stage as well. So that sets it very, very far apart. So here's, I think this is where it gets tough. The authorities are now not ruling out the possibility of airborne transmission of the virus. I think between that and what's happening on the cruise ships, it's pretty clear that this thing is spreading and spreading easily. So if we look at this a little bit further, we're going to just look at the incubation period as well. This is something that we have to keep harping on because this just keeps getting overlooked, and I don't think people are taking this part seriously enough yet. 2 Japanese evacuees get the virus after first testing negative. So it's possible to get a test wrong in a couple of ways. One is you test somebody, but the test comes back negative, but they're actually positive. So that's a false negative. And then the reverse of that would be you test somebody and they come back positive, but they're actually negative. They don't have the disease. So that would be false positive. So here we're looking at maybe a false negative or just simply that this wasn't detectable until the incubation period had progressed long enough. So this is 2 Japanese men who were evacuated from Wuhan late last month. That would be January, late last month, have now tested positive for COVID-19 after initially being cleared of the deadly disease. So both men here had tested negative on January 30th, and here it is January 11th when this is now being reported. So either the incubation period went for a long time, or maybe they got infected somewhere between when they were cleared and now through some other means. Don't know that yet, but the operative assumption is that they were tested, they were negative, but that was a false negative because they actually were infected. The test couldn't pick it up at that point, and then it picked it up a little bit later. So considering that, that supports the idea of the long incubation period, which we reported yesterday, could be as much as 24 days. Looks like in this case, it's at least 11 days in that case, if we just use these numbers as given. As well, let's combine that with the idea that the first quarantined American evacuees are to be released. And so this is a first group of Americans who were quarantined after being repatriated from the center of the outbreak in China, are expected to be released Tuesday. That's today. And that's after they've gone through their 14-day isolation quarantine period, and now they're going to be no signs of the disease emerge, so they're being let out. And you and I might question whether 14 days is long enough, given everything we've learned so far. As well, there's just this horrible situation with all these cruise ships that are just in limbo now. I honestly can't keep track of them all, but this is a common story. Thailand says ship won't be allowed to disembark. So this is a ship, the Westerdam cruise ship. It's just been traveling around, departed Hong Kong on February 1st with 1,455 passengers, 802 crew. Was set to arrive at a port in Bangkok, but they're like, nope, can't come in here. And then I think they've gone to 5 different ports now trying to find a place to go. And Thailand was the most recent one to say, no, you can't come here. I don't believe there's any cases of that have been identified of coronavirus on this. It's just showing that the level of fear that's on here. How many cases are there? Well, we don't know. And Kevin James, thank you so much here for bringing this to my attention through Twitter. Chris, I think this is important to talk about in today's daily update. This was sent to me today, at February 11th. The Chinese, are deliberately disobeying WHO guidelines to make the situation seem better than it is. And what he's talking about is that the Chinese media confirms that if they have asymptomatic cases of coronavirus, so this is somebody's been tested, and they come back as positive for the virus, but they haven't displayed what would be called symptoms, meaning they haven't got a fever, I presume. But you have to have some medical cutoff where you say, as long as we see a fever, a cough, something, they would be symptomatic, otherwise asymptomatic. So China's not going to report any asymptomatic cases as part of the larger count, as part of the official count. And is that really that critical? Well, maybe, if it turns out there's a lot of asymptomatic people who are also carriers and able to transmit the disease in the asymptomatic state. We don't know really if that's the case here or not, but it's not really good practice to say we've tested people, they've come back positive, but we're not going to count them, right? So thanks for tipping me off to that, Kevin, and that is worth watching. As well, a number of you have gotten back to me and asked what's the difference between the mortality rate and the case fatality rate, and this just popped up recently. You'll see things, it's going to show up now, so you should understand what this is. The mortality estimate at 1%. What's that? So the mortality rate is you take whatever deaths happen from the disease and you divide that by the total population. So if this was the United States, it would be, well, let's pretend one person died. It would be 1 divided by 320 million or so. And that gives you the mortality rate. So the mortality rate is total population into deaths from the disease. Alternatively, the case fatality rate is how many deaths from the disease, so same thing up top here, but now we're dividing it by the total that were infected. So let's just give an example around that real quick so you get it. Let's imagine we have a population of 1,000, 100 people got infected, 10 died. In this case, we have 10 divided by 1,000, so that's the total dead by the total population. That gives you the mortality rate, so that would be 1%. Alternatively, if we said 10 dead divided by 100 infected, that gives us 10%. That's the case fatality rate. So that's how those two things differ, and you'll be seeing them popping up. Just didn't want you to be confused. Good news, I guess here we're looking at FlightAware, this flightaware.com/live. This is a really great tool, and what I'm seeing here, so this is China in here, and that would be Mongolia right there. Very few flights. This is big blank area. Look at all these flights going around. I mean, you've got Japan here, you got the Philippines over here. This would be, you got your 2 Koreas here, South Korea, lots of planes, North Korea, obviously no planes up there, and Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, and Burma all up through here into India. So we see lots of flights going all around China, but just a few yet coming into China, principally here and here, just a couple of spots. But mostly those are down, but not at 0 yet. Still, it's good news that's happening. So I wanted to talk to you about how a vaccine works, because we've had a lot of people asking about the vaccine, and of course there have been headlines coming out saying vaccines are already in animal trials. And that's a very hopeful thing, because it sounds like a hop, skip, and a jump, right? Hey, we've identified a vaccine, couple of quick animal trials, we're good to go. We got to first understand what a vaccine is, how it works, and then I got to show you some data that says this might be tougher than you think. All right. A vaccine, it works by training the immune system to recognize and combat pathogens. So those are either viruses or bacteria. So what you do is you get antigens, meaning surface molecules that would be on the outside of a virus or a bacteria, because your body can see the outsides of these things better than the insides. And you take these antigens, they're called, and you inject these into your body, and the immune system then sees those things. It learns how to read them as hostile invaders. It produces antibodies, and then it remembers them for the future. So the next time you're challenged with these same things, your body already has an antibody for it, already has these antibody cells in your body, the T helpers. They're all fired up and ready to go and get activated and kick those things out next time it sees it. So this is very simply a vaccine. You introduce bits out of the bug into the body. So these are deactivated virus particles or bits of bacteria. You put it into your body, and then your white blood cells, they're triggered and they produce these antibodies. That's what these little Y-shaped things here are. They're antibodies. They recognize these things. You didn't do a good job showing how they bind, because they actually bind across this part. These should be stuck on like little hats on these things. And then later, if you actually encounter disease later, then voila, there's sticky antibodies that bind to it. And once that happens, your body can go and mount a vigorous response against those things. So that's cool. And it works like a charm most of the time. It's really spectacularly, fantastically complicated and complex. And that it works at all is just a mystery and awe-inspiring. It's fantastic. However, so I went digging around, and because I'd said before, that we didn't really have a coronavirus vaccine or SARS vaccine, and somebody said we did. So I went looking for it, and I didn't find one, but I did find that back in 2012. This is really important because this sort of illustrates the difficulty in creating a vaccine. Immunization with SARS coronavirus vaccines leads to pulmonary immunopathology on challenge with the SARS virus. Okay, it's a very sciencey headline. Let me decode that for you, because this is a really important concept here. So what they did is they made a SARS coronavirus vaccine, put it in, and the good news was these vaccines that they made all induced antibody and protection against infection with the SARS-CoV. So that's the good news. However, here's the bad news. The challenge of the mice, given any of the vaccines, led to occurrence of Th2 type immunopathology. There's two big types of T helper cells, Th1 and Th2. They both do different things, but if their response is overblown, it can be actually very damaging and very harmful. So that's what they're talking about here, immunopathology. Their pathology is some sort of illness resulting from the immune response itself. And what they're saying here is that it was good, the vaccines worked. We saw antibodies circulating in the animal models we were running, but when the challenge of the mice, so when they give the mice the SARS virus again, it activated an actual damaging response. And so their conclusion was you need to have caution in proceeding with application of a SARS-CoV vaccine in humans because it could lead to the same sort of response. Now, animals can be different. We don't know, but you have to be they're saying you need to be cautious. So let's look at this. So they were evaluating potential SARS-CoV virus vaccines that they could use in humans, but this effort was hampered by the occurrence in the initial preclinical trial of an immunopathogenic type lung disease among both ferrets and the monkeys they were trying in. So they were given a whole virus vaccine. They put a little alum in there to make it extra boosty. And then they were challenged with infectious SARS. And what happened was this lung disease. And it exhibited the beautiful pictures in this article and report showing all the histology of this. But what happened was it had all the characteristics they thought of a Th2 type immunopathology. And there's things like certain types of cells called eosinophils in the lung and other things that suggested that this was a Th2 type immunopathologic reaction. And we've seen this before, and this has come up in a vaccine before in young children who were given inactivated RSV vaccine and subsequently became infected with naturally occurring RSV. And most of these children experienced severe disease with infection that led to a high frequency of hospitalizations, and 2 children died from the infection. So it was actually the giving of the vaccine that sensitized the body, in this case the children's body, such that when they actually saw the thing they were supposed to be protected from, the body went haywire and actually attacked itself and created a lot of trouble. So let's read down a little bit further in this. We just read this upper part. Here's the lower part. The conclusion from that experience was clear. RSV lung disease was enhanced by the prior vaccination. Subsequent studies in animal models that are thought to mimic the human experience indicate RSV inactivated vaccine actually induces an increased CD4 plus T lymphocyte response, primarily of these Th2 cells. And so these are Th1 and Th2 cells are principally involved in this whole thing of producing these so-called cytokines. Th2 in particular increases all these different cytokines down here, and it means these eosinophils come into the lung, and the poor cells think they're fighting something, and they're dumping all these chemicals, and they actually end up doing a lot of damage accidentally. But it's how this works sometimes in immunologic responses. So at any rate, as we think that through a little bit, one of the things that happened with the Spanish flu was thought to be a cytokine storm, and we know that there's cytokine storms that happen with some viruses. We know that they're part of the H1N1 or the H/N series, sometimes create these cytokine storms. So what is this deadly immune storm that's caused by some flu infections? We know about it with respect to flus. Is it part of this thing that's happening? Is this why people's lungs are so damaged in some cases? Possibly. And so I just wanted to talk to you about what this cytokine storm is. It's a severe immune overreaction. And it can both sicken and kill patients who are infected with certain strains of flu virus. Don't know if that's the case for the coronavirus, but at least with that SARS study we just looked at for the vaccine production, that was a cytokine storm that was created lung damage. A cytokine storm is an overproduction of immune cells and their activating compounds called the cytokines, which in a flu infection is often associated with a surge of activated immune cells into the lungs, and the resulting lung inflammation and fluid buildup can lead to respiratory distress and can be contaminated by a secondary bacterial pneumonia, often enhancing mortality in patients. So this is what a cytokine storm looks like. Here's this T cell. It's just trying to be helpful. It's doing everything it can. Here's an antibody. It's getting activated by these antibodies. It says, oops, and it dumps some cytokines. You get this immunopathogenesis because you have this cytokine storm for all these interferons and interleukins and tumor necrosis factor, and all this junk is being dumped in. Capillary leak syndrome, so your blood vessels aren't holding things in that they ought to anymore. This leads to endothelial damage, which are the cells lining the insides of those capillaries. And if it goes on far enough, your end organ damage is multiple organ failure, pulmonary infiltrates, lung injury, acute respiratory distress syndrome, cardiovascular shock, renal failure, and things like that. So that's what a cytokine storm is. It's just your body saying, we haven't seen this thing before. We're trying to fight it off, but it just overreacts. So in this thing, not the flu, what am I going to have to do now? I'm going to have to actually add this piece down in here. I said yesterday no vaccine is available, so no prior vaccines to work from. Actually, we have a prior example now to work from, and that prior SARS vaccine turned out to be worse than nothing. It actually got the animals to become more pathological, not less, as a consequence of that. So here's the conclusion from today. More evidence is accumulating that COVID-19, aka the ninja virus, is airborne. And that's very much not good, but it spreads easily if it's spreading through pipes and buildings 10 floors. I mean, come on. If that's how it actually spread, this is very difficult. And of course, that makes a lot of sense given all the spraying that you see the Chinese doing with their trucks and handheld foggers and stuff like that. As well, the SARS vaccine experience says that a properly tested and working vaccine may be a long ways off because, listen, it's one thing to put it in animals, but then it's another thing to find out if those animals, A, got an immunological protection from it, or B, aren't going to be harmed by a re-challenge with the thing you're trying to protect them from. So that all has to be worked out, and it's going to be a while, I think, before we can be certain that that's actually working. And the cytokine storm, or any other unfortunate immune response, which we seem to be having here, is as or more damaging than the virus going around killing the cells directly itself. So it's one thing to have the virus in there doing its damage. It's another when your body overreacts and attacks and ends up doing more damage than the virus itself was going to do. So that's your update for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something, and we're going to keep raising all of this information and giving you the proper context because you deserve it and you need it. Good day.